You know how everything's a subscription now? Music, movies, even socks. I swear if it...
To continue this ad, please upgrade to Premium Plus Platinum.
What? No, anyway, Blue Apron...
This is a pay-per-listen ad. Please confirm your billing.
Oh, that's annoying. At least with the new Blue Apron, there's no subscription needed. Get delicious meals delivered without the weekly plan.
Wait, no subscription?
Keep the flavor. Ditch the subscription. Get 20% off your first 2 orders with code APRON20. Terms and conditions apply. Visit blueapron.com/terms for more.
The market's uncertain, revenue's tight, and hiring on hold. That's why results-driven companies are using Upwork to keep work moving. Go to Upwork.com today and start hiring proven freelance talent fast. No bulky overhead. No rigid long-term contracts. Just the right expert right when you need them. Work smarter and faster with Upwork. Go to Upwork.com now and find your freelance expert. That's UPWORK.com. Post a job for free and get started today.
And welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. Today I'm going to explore the question of rearmament in Britain during the mid to late 1930s and the political forces both for and against this. It's kind of topical. If you were to read in Britain some of the more, at the moment, some of the more kind of centre-right newspapers, things like the Times, or the more rabidly right ones, the Telegraph, it's full of, retired generals, retired MI6 guys, people from opaque-sounding Atlanticist think tanks, saying, war with Russia is inevitable. We may even be at war with Russia. You never know. It's hard to tell these days. What is a war after all? And we've got to pour money into the defence budget. We've got to start rearming, and we've got to make sure that we have an army fit for war in the 21st century. Now, whatever the kind of the logic behind any of that is, or the rights or the wrongs of it, or the risks of it, there have been previous moments in the 20th century where the question of rearmament is a very, very vexed one. And of course, people living in the 1930s were living in the shadow of the previous war that had broke out 2 decades beforehand, and were justifiably anxious about the possibility of a second war. And they were even more anxious because the means by which to bring the battlefield directly to the home front were there in the guise of aircraft. And it was people were very well educated, very knowledgeable for the most part. It was a very knowledgeable population on military campaigns against civilian targets in the 1930s. People could, at the cinema, see pathé newsreels of the bombings of Guernica and Nanjing and Shanghai and Abyssinia, and they were, aware of Germany's growing air power. So there were considerable anxieties, and as Geoffrey Wheatcroft pointed out in his brilliant essay, challenging the idea of the Second World War being this sort of virtuous good war, the majority of casualties of the Second World War were civilians. And if you read The Bombing War by Richard Overy, the war was fought from the air, largely against civilian populations. Everything else that we see from land campaigns and battles between rival armies is dwarfed by the actual civilian cost of the war. So today I'm going to look at a book I haven't picked up for ages, Daniel Todman's the first of two volumes of his book, Britain's War, 1937 to 1941. This volume is. The second one, intriguingly, takes us up to 1947, and I guess the loss of India from the British Empire, and the kind of the beginnings of Britain's withdrawal from Palestine are both kind of epilogues, really, to Britain's Second World War. So, Daniel Todman writes, in February 1936, the Cabinet approved a new scheme for the period 1937 to 42 that included the construction of 7 battleships and 4 aircraft carriers, and the expansion of the RAF's UK-based squadrons to at least 1,500 aircraft, more if the German Air Force kept getting larger. For all Baldwin's earlier promises that there would be no arms race, this was a programme designed to ensure that the UK maintained the world's most powerful fleet and developed one of its strongest air forces, but the point was still to deter a war, not to fight one. The price of rearmament also kept growing. Defence spending for the financial year 1935 to 36 was £137 million, higher as a proportion of GDP than it had been since the early 1920s. At the start of 1936, it was estimated that the new programme would cost at least another £1,000 million by the early 1940s. To start to meet these costs, Chamberlain increased the basic rate of income tax in his April 1936 budget by 1.25% and introduced a controversial levy on sugar, while Treasury officials prepared to raise a defence loan to cover future expenditure. In striking contrast to their attitude to deficit spending on public works to reduce unemployment, borrowing for defence was seen as an acceptable short-term solution to the problem of national security. This is something that, again, has been a recurring feature of British priorities during the Second World War, during the Cold War era, and now. The idea that when parties or figures on the left say, well, what if we could just deficit spend, what we could borrow to spend to bring depressed parts of the country out of economic crisis, bring infrastructure jobs, new facilities, roads, hospitals, schools, all the stuff that you need that would give South Wales or the northeast of England a shot in the arm for a generation. There's this kind of rolling of eyes and this sort of kind of faintly horrified expression from the British kind of political stroke Mandarin class that some kind of naive profligacy, the product of too many books on Bolshevism, has been proposed. And of course, when military spending is suggested in sort of defence of the realm, and military spending is kind of amongst the most useless forms of public expenditure. You're buying a thing that hopefully you never have to use, ideally. And if you do, it's normally pretty catastrophic. That rarely is much of a problem for the British state. As it turned out, increases in revenue made a loan unnecessary in 1936. The Treasury tried to retain a leash on spending, but its key aim was less to hold back rearmament than to match it to strategic priorities. as the key debates revolved around industrial rather than financial capacity. The last war had educated a generation of strategists in the importance of mass production. Throughout the interwar period, military contracts were placed to try to maintain munitions building capacity, and it was generally acknowledged that another major conflict would see massive government intervention to expand and direct arms production. So there has to be, and there certainly was in America, this complex web of relationships between the government and arms manufacturers, and the fact that, even when wars aren't happening, you have to sort of keep the arms manufacturers fed, because if they close their factories and lay off workers and lay off expertise and designers and engineers and all these kinds of things, when a crisis does hit, you've not got a defense industry. So keeping it well fed is always a good thing. After the Second World War in America, there was in California, the home of the aviation industry during the war, there was an epic slump. And it was only the Cold War that revived it. And conspiracy theorists and it's not necessarily conspiracy theorists, people that can look objectively at the numbers, can observe that for American aviation, the Cold War was enormously important, enormously valuable, and it was essential in a way for the Cold War to keep expenditure going, and it shows you also the extent to which arms industries are reliant on the state. The only other source of revenue is other states. You don't find individuals or corporations buying warships or bombers. And the state, as we saw yesterday when we're looking at the Turkish dreadnoughts, the state can also choose to requisition what it needs, and to prevent foreign buyers from accessing domestic military hardware. So the other thing there is the question of mass production, and the Second World War would be one on that. It can't be overstated the extent to which the Second World War was a war of material production, and the side that can produce more is more likely to win, no matter how skilled the generals on the other side are. By replacing tanks, the British were able, and these are all American tanks, the British were eventually able to prevail at El Alamein. And it was really a matter of material and equipment. Intervening to escalate munitions production would be an expensive and economically disruptive process. Writes Daniel Todman. It would also be politically costly, not least because in the era of dictatorship and central planning, it carried overtones of the state suborning private enterprise. Since the aim of British strategy was still deterrence, defence programmes targeted increases in frontline strength that would put off potential opponents, not the wholesale shifting of industry towards a wartime level of munitions output, which is what does happen once the deterrence strategy has failed, and once it becomes clear that a war for national survival has begun. Even this more limited approach to rearmament, however, posed its own set of problems. The UK had at this time no single Ministry of Defence, but rather separate service ministries, the Admiralty, the War Office and the Air Ministry, to represent each of the armed services. While the government owned some munitions factories and dockyards, the bulk of military equipment was bought from private contractors, with which the individual service ministries negotiated design briefs and orders. In order, as the forces all entered into their expansion programs, the demands competed for limited industrial capacity without regard for strategic priority. They competed not only with each other, but also with purchases from overseas and the demands of civilian consumption at home. During 1936, instances increased the rearmament being delayed by bottlenecks in production. By the end of the year, it was apparent that the aircraft deliveries, in particular, were well down on the targets laid out that spring. As the government spent more, however, suspicions also grew about the healthy profits being made by the arms industry. Together, these provided the context for a debate about whether to step up state control. In January 1936, Lord Weir, a Scottish industrialist who had overseen the exponential increase in aircraft output during the last war and was now advising the government on future arms production, sounded a warning to ministers about the demands of the expanded rearmaments program. Its completion, he wrote, would require either a semi-war organization or industrial controls or a reduction in the normal civil activity and our export trade. Weir opposed the first as a concession to socialism and the second as a threat to economic recovery. When the cabinet approved the program the following month, it therefore decided not to instruct industry to prioritize defense orders, but did agree to invest more money in increasing capacity. This would happen through a shadow factory scheme, under which automobile companies agreed to build new plants on the government's account to mass produce planes and aero engines designed by aircraft manufacturers. In 2 years' time, when these factories came online, they would help to ensure the completion of Britain's deterrent air force. Of course, Rolls-Royce building the Merlin engine, which went into the Spitfire and other aircraft. So part of this explains Britain's victory in the Battle of Britain. I've talked about that many a time, and there are many reasons why Germany didn't succeed. Not least the fact that it wasn't particularly a German priority. It was kind of a sideshow and a bit of a fishing expedition by Hitler that turned out to be increasingly a waste of time. But the fact that the British could keep putting aircraft in the air, they could lose aircraft and produce more, is partly to do with this shadow factory system. The fact that they had built industrial infrastructure to win a battle that they didn't even know was coming. Well, maybe they had an inkling that it might do. And so this is one of the reasons why in 1940, not everybody, even at Dunkirk, not everybody is entirely despairing. And the idea that Britain can fight on is in the minds of many in the cabinet, is partly to do with the fact that they knew there was an industrial infrastructure there. When you realise that you've got nothing to make weapons with, it's a whole different conversation.
You know how everything's a subscription now? Music, movies, even socks. I swear if
To continue this ad, please upgrade to Premium Plus Platinum.
What? No. Anyway, Blue Apron...
This is a pay-per-listen ad. Please confirm your billing.
Oh, that's annoying. At least with the new Blue Apron, there's no subscription needed. Get delicious meals delivered without the weekly plan.
Wait, no subscription?
Keep the flavor. Ditch the subscription. Get 20% off your first 2 orders with code APRON20. Terms and conditions apply. Visit blueapron.com/terms for more.
The market's uncertain, revenue's tight, and hiring on hold. That's why results-driven companies are using Upwork to keep work moving. Go to Upwork.com today and start hiring proven freelance talent fast. No bulky overhead. No rigid long-term contracts. Just the right expert right when you need them. Work smarter and faster with Upwork. Go to Upwork.com now and find your freelance expert. That's UPWORK.com. Post a job for free and get started today.
At Capella University, learning online doesn't mean learning alone. You'll get support from people who care about your success, like your enrollment specialist who gets to know you and the goals you'd like to achieve. You'll also get a designated academic coach who's with you throughout your entire program. Plus, career coaches are available to help you navigate your professional goals. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Experts such as Weir, writes Daniel Todman, were convinced that the limited availability of skilled workers in the engineering sector would be a critical obstacle to expanding arms production. In the last war, this obstacle had been overcome by diluting the workforce, breaking down manufacturing processes into simpler operations that could be performed by less qualified workers, while paying skilled engineers more to oversee their new colleagues. Such schemes could only be put into place with the agreement of trade unionists with their own set of concerns, a desire to see jobs brought to their members who were still unemployed, and an insistence that they too should benefit from fat arms contracts, and the fear that if no war came, the current boom in arms production would be followed by a slump that would leave skilled workers on the streets. The government shied away from intervening in questions of industrial relations, worried that discussions at a national level with trade union leaders would be encumbered by its ideological differences with Labour. Instead, dilution was left to be settled at a local level by negotiation in individual factories. In early 1936, under parliamentary pressure over problems in production, Baldwin created a new post of Minister for Coordination of Defence. Churchill held back in his criticisms of the government in the hope that he might be given the job. It would offer a dynamic leader the chance to invigorate the country, drive on rearmament, and increase his political capital. For precisely these reasons, Baldwin and Chamberlain had no intention of giving it to him. Instead, the post went to the former Attorney General, Sir Thomas Inskip. His role was not to instruct industry, but rather to align competing demands for scarce industrial resources. Churchill's cronies caricatured Inskip as an incapable yes-man, calling his appointment the most cynical since Caligula made his horse proconsul. Unlike their man, Inskip's equine qualities tended more to the cart horse than the show pony. But this was no disadvantage in his efforts to achieve compromises that would square the circle of genuine strategic difficulty. So this is, despite Churchill and his gang mocking Inskip's appointments are really, really important because it was about finding those key compromises between different services and their demands for different armaments, and also between that and the civilian economy. Disappointed, Churchill now ramped up his attacks on the government. In the budget debate of April, this is 1936, he argued that peacetime standards were insufficient to the defence crisis now facing the nation. We must substitute other conditions, not necessarily war conditions, but conditions which would impinge upon the ordinary daily life and business of this country. When he went with the other backbenchers to visit Baldwin at the end of July, he put a figure on that sacrifice. 25 to 30% of the key engineering industries must be devoted to the manufacture of arms. From the moment he arrived in his new job, Inskip too had pondered whether the government ought to intervene in industrial production. As Weir, Chamberlain, and the Treasury all made plain, such interference would come at a cost, a reduction in engineering exports that would lose a large part of our world market, not merely temporarily, but probably forever. If you start building aircraft and you stop exporting whatever it is, locomotive parts or other key bits of engineering equipment, not only do domestic markets around the world, which are underdeveloped because you've been exporting stuff to them, start to very quickly revive themselves because people in India or Iran or Egypt say, well, we need this thing. Right, well, who can make it here? But also, big rivals like America and to perhaps even Germany will step in and provide. Perhaps not Germany, actually, on reflection, because of German autarky and their own government, but certainly the fear was America gobbling up those markets. So, by losing exports in order to rearm and for a war which may or may not happen, then you are kind of shooting yourself in the foot a little bit.
You know how everything's a subscription now? Music, movies, even socks. I swear if I...
To continue this ad, please upgrade to Premium Plus Platinum.
What? No. Anyway, Blue Apron...
This is a pay-per-listen ad. Please confirm your billing.
Oh, that's annoying. At least with the new Blue Apron, there's no subscription needed. Get delicious meals delivered without the weekly plan.
Wait, no subscription?
Keep the flavor. Ditch the subscription. Get 20% off your first 2 orders with code APRON20. Terms and conditions apply. Visit blueapron.com/terms for more.
The market's uncertain, revenue's tight, and hiring on hold. That's why results-driven companies are using Upwork to keep work moving. Go to Upwork.com today and start hiring proven freelance talent fast. No bulky overhead. No rigid long-term contracts. Just the right expert right when you need them. Work smarter and faster with Upwork. Go to Upwork.com now and find your freelance expert. That's UPWORK.com. Post a job for free and get started today.
Chamberlain responded, "I do not believe that this is imminent. By careful diplomacy, I believe we can stave it off, perhaps indefinitely, the war. But if we were now to follow Winston's advice and sacrifice our commerce to the manufacture of arms, we should inflict a certain injury on our trade from which it would take generations to recover. We should destroy the confidence which now happily exists, and we should cripple the revenue." Inskip was duly persuaded against greater measures of compulsion. Churchill was not so mollified. Since Inskip was not controlling industry, he returned to the demands for the formation of a Ministry of Supply to direct the provision of material. In mid-November 1936, when Liberal MPs tabled an amendment to the King's speech calling for the nationalisation of the defence industries in the hope of eliminating profit that would halt the arms race, Churchill took the opportunity to accuse the government of wasting time in a period of procrastination, of half measures, of soothing and baffling expedients, of delays. Whatever its ambitious programmes for the future, he charged, for the next 18 months the armed forces would be dangerously weak in the face of a revitalised Germany. Defending himself, Baldwin blamed the past public opinion for current deficiencies in defence. Looking back to 1933 and 1934, he argued that there had been a stronger pacifist feeling running through this country than at any time since the war. Nonetheless, he managed during the 1935 election to secure public support for rearmament, something which he would not have been possible if he had spoken out more ardently at an earlier date. The result, however, was that democratic Britain was lagging 2 years behind dictatorial Germany in its military preparations. And what Baldwin says is to some extent true. There were there was a very significant anti-war, anti-rearmament movement in the country that had blamed arms races on the outbreak of the First World War with some degree of justification. So we'll dive back into that in the not too distant future, and I'll be doing a separate recording later today about which I have yet to decide, but it's always a last minute decision a lot of the time. If you can check out the website, there's a lot going on there at the moment. There's a lot for students if you're studying. I'm trying to kind of complete the entire AQA syllabus on the website, so do check it out. And I'll be doing the other UK syllabuses as well throughout the year. And as I sometimes mention, the podcast it runs on a kind of a shoestring budget, but it does still carry a kind of a cost. If you value it, if you like it, and you appreciate it, a one-off donation or a subscription is your way of ensuring that it gets to continue in these wintry economic times in which we live. So, thanks very much, and I'll catch you on the next Explaining History podcast. Bye-bye.
Hey folks, it's Mark Marin from WTF. Today I want to talk to you about Boost Mobile, offering reliable nationwide coverage backed by a 30-day money-back guarantee. Love your service or get your money back, no questions asked. Boost Mobile offers the coverage, network speed, and service you're used to, but at more affordable prices. Why pay more if you don't have to? You can get an unlimited plan for $25 a month that will never increase in price, ever. No price hikes, no multi-line requirements, no stress. Visit your nearest Boost Mobile store or find them online at boostmobile.com. After 30 gigabytes, customers may experience slower speeds. Customers will pay $25 per month as long as they remain active on the Boost Unlimited plan.
At Capella University, learning online doesn't mean learning alone. You'll get support from people who care about your success, like your enrollment specialist who gets to know you and the goals you'd like to achieve. You'll also get a designated academic coach who's with you throughout your entire program. Plus, career coaches are available to help you navigate your professional goals. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Explaining History. This podcast is an independent production, and it's listener support that keeps these conversations going week after week. If you find value in the show and want to help cover the costs of research and production, please consider making a contribution. You can join our community on Patreon or make a one-off donation. Just follow the links in the show notes for this episode. Every bit of support is truly appreciated. Thanks again for listening.